Good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to AM UX, where we discuss all things UX. We usually host these events on the first Wednesday of every month. So if you like what we discuss over here, definitely keep a lookout for more meetup announcements. But without any further ado, I would like to hand it over to our speaker today, who is Eric Toledo. He is the Director of Design here at Salesforce. After he's done with his presentations, maybe we can take questions at the end. So yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Awesome. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, cool. Thank you, Vijeta, for having me. Excited to be here. You are all overachievers for being here this morning. I commend you for taking time outside of your busy schedules to come hang and listen to an old guy gibberish about leadership. As Vijeta said, I currently proudly serving the Pardot UX team at Salesforce. Before that, I was Director of Design and Research at Netlify. Also served at Mailchimp, where I helped evolve the product into a platform and evolve the brand, and at Apple, where I brought TestFlight to the developer experience. I currently live in Morningside with my wife and 2 kids. That's Sam and Anna, pretending to be me. They're about a year apart and not on purpose. And this is my 3rd and final kid, Mochi. And the last time Michael asked me to come speak at AMUX, it was September 6, 2017, and I was about a year into my tenure. A newly minted manager, learning how to bring structure to a team of about 12 product designers, broad-eyed, bushy-tailed, naive new leader who wore a lot of hoodies to work. I had no idea what kind of challenges were right around the corner, and I can't say it was ever really an aspiration to be a manager. I guess I kind of fell into it when I saw that there was a desire for the teams to collaborate, and there weren't any really processes there to help accommodate that. So I'd like to say my journey into management was an attempt to build a playground so I could actually play on it. That's basically my team kicking me off the playground. What I learned about myself was that I find people fascinating. I'm a total people watcher in sometimes a creepy way. And I'm always curious about the stories and potential that each individual holds, What I also learned is that I couldn't use the same skills to demand the type of respect I could as a contributor. And I experienced the kind of uncertainty that leadership brings, less maps to follow, less guidance to refer to, and the unpredictability of people and circumstance. So I'll kick things off with a simple question, a point of reflection. Okay, what are we tasked to do as leaders? This is just a good question to ask yourself every so often. I like to think about like this, throughout our careers, we'll be spending energy across these 3 buckets. Josh knows this well: people, process, and craft. On the people end of the spectrum, we're tasked to attract talent, inspire others around a cause and a vision, challenge our people to grow and explore beyond their current norms, and broaden their sphere of influence, creating opportunities for growth, giving feedback, managing conflict. And on the process side, we're managing up and down, managing across to build partnerships and illuminate opportunities, clear blockers, communicate progress, and create mechanisms for visibility and communication. On the craft end of the spectrum, where we typically start our careers, we're developing a shared vision and strategy, establishing new work lanes, managing priorities, all to help elevate the quality of our craft. And of course, writing those TPS reports. And I'd say all those things are important, but I'll sum it up like this. Leadership requires that we attract and nurture a vast diversity of talent and connect that talent to the needs of the businesses we work for and the communities that we serve. And it's a big responsibility. And while there are a number of resources that help shape my perspective, there's no definitive guidebook to managing humans that I'm aware of. Julie Zhu, former VP of design at Facebook, says, "You won't find your leadership answers in a book, but repetition will help you find your footing after about 4 years." And I say that sounds about right. So I don't know where you are in your career journey, and if you're growing or you've gone through some significant growth, you've likely found yourself in some form of discomfort, maybe even struggled with a bit of imposter syndrome. Am I doing this right? Do my teammates think I'm a competent leader? Am I focused on the right problem? Am I sucking at being a boss right now? Am I even asking the right questions? What is life? But let's talk about finding some Zen. I like for everyone to close their eyes for a moment and think about your best day at work. What made it stand out? I'd say my best days were filled with a strong sense of direction and purpose. Zen is a state of being at peace with your own thoughts, being self-aware of your place within the universe. Sounds nice, right? There've been defining moments in my career where I could confidently claim a kind of peace, often happening when there's confidence behind my movement, a sense that someone trusts in my abilities. As an IC, you likely experience this in a common term coined as flow state, where you've got so much clarity and mastery in your craft that you can put on headphones and jam while you work. For those of you navigating growing organizations, perhaps taking on larger initiatives or even managing people for the first time, your mental wellness can be the first thing to suffer if you're not paying attention to it. So much of what I'll share today are things that help me anchor in my purpose and direction, and things I wish I'd known coming up as a manager, and perspectives that I still carry with me in my journey today. So what is servant leadership? Servant leadership is a leadership philosophy in which the goal of the leader is to serve. Profound. At the heart of it is the notion that that your people are your most valuable asset in the organization, the heart of soul of your culture, the creative energy that gets the business from point A to point B, and in that we shift what we value from short-term output to long-term outcomes and the health and wellness of our teams. That ultimately affects the quality of what we're delivering, and more importantly, the long-term likelihood of teams repeating and scaling their successes. And when we're looking for purpose and impact, we likely look no further than the people we serve for direction. And that's pretty much it. See, I've got about an hour left. Okay. Okay. I like to unpack a few topics that I consider important dimensions to servant leadership. Safety and trust is an overarching tenet that bleeds into everything we do. The notion that nothing is sacred, leading with curiosity, and bringing levity into your work. There's so many dimensions to servant leadership, but I'm going to start with the most important one I'll spend most of my time on here, and that is safety and trust. Are you seeing this change? Okay, cool. And Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek marvels about the dynamic between the members of the most highest functioning teams in the world. I highly recommend this book. But he's speaking about the Marines. He asserts that trust is the glue that binds. In the world of combat, they can't afford to squabble internally because it can mean a difference between life and death, right? Instead, they're steadfast on focusing outward on the on their enemy, like we should be on our competitors, and trusting each other with their own lives, like we should trust in our peers. He describes that in are you seeing this? Okay. He describes it in the Navy SEALs, they draw a scale of performance and trust. Performance is the traditional metric. That's everything on the battlefield. Trust is everything off the battlefield, who you are as an individual, as a human. I may trust you with my life, but do I trust you with my money and my wife? And then everybody wants the high performer, high trust, the top right corner. Nobody wants the low performer, low trust, bottom left corner. But what they learned is that the high performer, low trust, was a toxic leader and a toxic team member. And they preferred the medium to low performer, high trust individual, because that's the person they would trust with their family. That's the person they could up level. They trusted to up level in the organization. And I think about this dynamic all the time when I watch teams cannibalize themselves, or refuse to communicate or understand each other, refuse to lean on each other to move the business as a unit, rather than choosing to benefit they choose to benefit their own agendas, their own departments, their own teams. So how do we nurture trust in a team environment? That can be approached in a number of ways and requires a lot of time and consistency. But if you're new to an organization, it's important, or even if you've been around for a while, it's important to signal that you're open and willing to learn how things work before you make any motion to change any status quo. You may be familiar with this notion, but keep, stop, start's super handy framework I like to use to assess what teams and peers tell me is working well, what we should stop doing altogether, and what improvements we should be making. You can do this with your team as a reoccurring retro. At Salesforce, we do this sprintly. It's an awesome mechanism to look for small wins in support of your team members. And you can do this with your peers, working horizontally to establish the proper working agreements and set proper expectations and processes between groups. You can always start with why things work the way they do, what's working well, what's not working so well, and what needs to change. Another framework I like to consider is OALTA, observing the situation, ask and inquire about the problem, listen and collect data to inform a position, test your position with your team and your stakeholders, and finally act on your intuition. I had an incredibly talented manager come to me once with some frustration that she wasn't getting the cooperation she needed from another leader to pave the way for some strategic work. And she told me how many times she met with this other leader. And I asked, well, what's the nature of your conversations? And it occurred to me, that the basis of their relationship was purely on a things I need from you basis. And I suggested that she get coffee with this leader, learn more about her, ask what she could be doing to help her peer, So as you start to practice some of this, you'll begin to develop what I like to call persuasion through partnership. And establishing strong relationships with your peers and understanding what types of challenges they face, what motivates them. And this type of active listening helps you develop a position of compassion in order to drive alignment and eventually ask for what you need. And with time, you'll learn how to speak the language of your partner. Listen carefully to how they describe their past successes, their goals, their aspirations. Perhaps it's a PM where the language is more around the business metric and what's important for that individual, or perhaps it's an engineer that's looking critically at what type of technology they're looking to leverage to accomplish a thing. Understanding what's important to them helps reframe your ask through the lens of their motivators. Altitudes and horizons are other dimensions I like to keep in mind when aligning with my team and partners. In these handy frameworks, almost every thought has a home. It just needs to be framed in the right dimension, right? This is a clip from Peter Merholtz and Kristen Skinner's org design for design orgs, where they map out the various altitudes your team would operate across skill levels. Chris, you're very familiar with this. If you're managing up, down, and across, it's helpful to know what altitude you need to be thinking in order to land your message. So if you're hobnobbing with the CEO, she's likely to be thinking, big picture, 10,000 foot level where market opportunities, competitors, culture, company growth are top of mind. Coaching a junior designer, well, they're likely to be at the opposite end of the spectrum, on the ground floor, honing their craft, interested in the latest design tools and looking for ways to level up their game. Horizons are a handy way to frame your thoughts. Have some crazy ass ideas about space travel that would benefit the biz. Put it in Horizon 4, unless you're working for Elon Musk. It has a home. Yes, that's my face on a sticker. My team like to make fun of me for using this a lot. Framing your thoughts in the right dimension disarms your colleagues, gives them the proper context, enhancing your ability to persuade and influence the partnership. Cool. I had a team that was struggling with a group of PMs. Lots of short-term thinking, not a lot of room to explore beyond immediate, arguably band-aid prescriptive solutioning. And when surfacing my concerns to these PMs, it became clear to me that what was affecting them was this sort of fear of failure, that was driving a lot of this behavior. These PMs weren't given the permission to learn, permission to experiment, permission to explore, rather taught to over-index on shipping a thing that was adversely affecting my team. Frankly, a waste of strong talent, So when we don't create space for our teams to do innovative work, they'll find another place to do it. Stephen Gates once shared that he does this weekly occurrence he called the belly flop of the week. I love this. The idea here was to encourage the team to share their biggest learning for the week. And in this, I sought to incorporate this kind of sharing in my management team's quarterly retros. But what it does is inherently shift the room's mindset to a growth mindset. And we celebrate those failures, right? And we openly invite diversity of thought, building an environment of rich ideas. I believe we all enter the world, a new company with the capacity to evolve the way we work and evolve the way we think. And as leaders, we should be unlocking this for the business. Sir Ken Richardson, a new hero, talks about nurturing this kind of thinking in our educational system and how the educational system often degrades our ability to leverage this wide range of diverse perspectives and talent. He asserts that the system needs to evolve to value and nurture creativity, and I think the same goes for our companies, right? Ken tells a story of a little girl who sat down, at a drawing class, and the teacher asked, "Okay, what are you going to draw?" And she says, "I'm going to draw God." And the teacher says, "Well, nobody's ever seen God." And the little girl says, "Well, they're about to." I just love this capacity to express the thought without a fear of what everyone else thinks. The capacity to be fearless and it just drastically devolves as we get older. And I think we can help others retain and develop that innovative spirit, especially as we develop longer tenures in an organization. We learn where all the furniture lives, and we can teach others how to navigate it. So if you haven't read Gordon McKenzie's Orbiting the Giant Hairball, I highly recommend it. He describes complexity of the corporate cultures as they grow into the sort of tanglings akin to a giant hairball. And I'll read a few excerpts from it. He says, "Orbiting is responsible creativity, vigorously exploring and operating beyond the hairball of the corporate mindset, beyond accepted models and patterns or standards, all the while remaining connected to the spirit of the corporate mission." He says, "To find orbit around a corporate hairball is to find a place of balance where you benefit from the physical, intellectual, and philosophical resources of the organization without becoming entombed in the bureaucracy of the institution." Heavy stuff, but so good. Helping our people find their own orbits is one of many tasks of a servant leader. And one of the things we did was implement design challenges to create that space. Chris Blair was part of that at Mailchimp. And more importantly, push into developing discovery mechanisms to help teams explore problem space and articulate possibility, creating touch points to come together as a design team and celebrate variation and divergent thought. And one of the ways we can nurture creative environments is to encourage sharing of raw ideas early and often. I like to call this sharing unbaked bread. Vegeta knows that well. Anybody familiar with this story of Ish? This is like one of my favorite books in my kids' library, but it's the story of a child who creates these wonderful little sketches, puts them up everywhere, but then all of a sudden becomes scared to share them because someone comments that they aren't finished or just right. In the end, she learns that these sketches are super valuable to the world just as they are, And so it's this awesome idea of just getting ish with your ideas. It's also like, a really handy technique and constantly testing your position. And as a designer, I do this often, throwing something against the wall to see if it resonates with my stakeholders. This works really well in marriage, by the way. When you're operating as a servant leader, all ideas are welcome, and it's up to you to facilitate and encourage. Did that just change just now? That's weird. Okay. It's up to you to facilitate and encourage sharing early and often, but most importantly, the ideas are not and cannot be sacred. I spent years collaborating in musical endeavors, various formats, and I can say the most valuable things that I took away from this experience is the ability to create without being so attached to my ideas. And that more often than not, it's the input of my colleagues and collaborators that make my ish ideas so much better. Cool. So on the same note, I think we can carry the same approach with the processes that we might implement for our teams. And in this, I don't think processes are sacred. If you're in a high growth environment, the processes that got you to where you are aren't likely the same processes that are going to get you to the next level. And in this, I like to approach everything as an experiment, where the product you're designing is the creator's experience, testing with your peers, testing with your own team, getting feedback, iterating, OALTA. I recall my first all hands I volunteered to speak at Mailchimp before our product design and engineering team. At the time, you could expect like 300 plus people attending these things. The design team was still really small, and I hated public speaking. I still hate public speaking. I was a wreck with anxiety leading up to it. It had to be perfect. It carried the weight of the world on my shoulders, And after it was done, I asked my boss if he had any feedback for me, and he said, "I didn't really understand what you're saying, but it seemed to resonate with the people." Right. So yes, nothing is sacred. I love this quote from Maya Angelou. At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did, but they will remember how you made them feel. And this notion that your perfectionist tendencies are likely getting in your way. Cool. Curiosity first. When we take a curiosity first approach, we get into the guts of an individual's thought process. In the same way we might approach a design crit, giving someone feedback or helping someone get unstuck requires a level of inquiry over advocacy to help illuminate different dimensions of a problem, right? So it requires that we lean more into active listening to invoke the right questions. And in this, you don't have to be the loudest person in the room to be a great leader, rather speaking with intention at the right moments and asking the right questions to help move a conversation towards an intended outcome. There's two relative formations you could take as a leader, one leading from the front, one leading from the back. Leading from the back is my default position. Remember, OALTA begins with observe. And in servant leadership, there's an ebb and flow of leading from the front and leading from the back. Leading with curiosity allows us to fully observe the world when leading from the back. And when you're leading from the front, you're standing up something new, especially if you're seeing members of your team struggle or spinning on a problem, taking the reins and providing a lot of guidance. But as you see members of your team stepping up and driving the conversation, you might slowly shift to the back, right? So this is how I think about nurturing autonomy. Observation for action. I've been described as a fixer. I think this is maybe more of a male behavior, but it's basically the need to immediately come to the table with a course of action to fix a situation. Just because someone is coming to you with an issue doesn't necessarily mean they need you to fix it. This is observation coming from my wife, but just as easily applies to the workspace. And I think there's a degree of proactive that serves us well at a certain altitude. But the broader the scope of our responsibilities, the less I feel this behavior serves us well. Why? because we're surrounded by other players in the ecosystem, a complex ecosystem, and sometimes it's in our best interest to observe what's happening in our surroundings, ask a lot of questions to get proper understanding and scope of the problem in order to diagnose the best path forward. I've seen Cliff and Jetta do this all the time. Awesome. Perhaps you have no idea how a situation might play out, regardless of the amount of planning and analyzing. But I'd say, the only certainty in our respective journeys is that there is no certainty at all. Has anybody seen The Biggest Little Farm? This is an awesome film. It's beautifully shot. You got to see this just for the cinematography alone. But it's the story of a young couple, Chester and Molly. They venture out into the California desert to create this orchard. And they put their blood, sweat, and tears into building this thing. And the larger it gets, the harder it gets to manage, with things like dust storms and predators coming out of the woodworks, wolves and owls. And the couple reaches this sort of tipping point, in the film, where their orchard has gone out of control with these small snails. They take over the farm, eating all the fruit in the orchard. And the couple has the crew assemble and handpick bucket loads of these snails out of the trees, only to have them escape back out, right back into the fruit trees. And this goes on for weeks. But when Chester finally stops and realizes that he has his ducks cooped up in pens to keep them from eating the low-lying crops, he unleashes them into the orchard, and they end up devouring all the snails from the trees. It's just an amazing moment. Here you see like the duck kind of like, oh, snails, dinner time. But in the end, it required this sort of acute awareness of each member of the ecosystem and a redirection of resources in order to properly solve the problem. And I learned that our roles as leaders are very similar. It requires some patience and awareness to understand how things are working before we decide to dive into action. And I learned that I also want to be a farmer. Go see this film, it's awesome. Finally, I'm going to cover the notion of levity. Throughout my career, I was probably the most serious person in the room, overanalyzing everyone's responses, overthinking their reaction to my work. I guess everyone likely has periods of intensity about their work at points in their career, and I think that's okay. But there was a turning point for me. This is Jeff Robbins. He led the iTunes org, and Jeff Review was a big deal at Apple. Jeff built SoundJam MP, and it was bought by Apple back in the 90s and renamed something called iTunes. We all reported up to our director of design, Bill Bachman, who reported up to Jeff. Now, nothing was built without Jeff's approval, and there's typically an audience of about 50 plus people in the room when we presented to Jeff. He was an intense human being, like the stonewall demeanor, and he liked to give just painfully candid feedback. You just left the room with your tail between your legs. But we had to work really hard to develop rapport with Jeff, and didn't really make much progress for a long time until one sunny day. A colleague of mine, Ryan Farina, presented some work he was developing for the Apple Watch, and he told a brilliant story of how the very first beta Watch OS app would get installed over the air via TestFlight to the device, and showed an app appearing, a beta app appearing on the face of the Apple Watch. And then he closed with a smiley face and a thank you. And there were laughs across the room. This is so subtle. And a smile on Jeff's face. And I saw humor making its way into the heart of even the most stoic characters. And in that moment, I realized the power of humor in the workplace and how it really brought us all together as a team that day. I've done, I feel like done some of my best work when I've incorporated enough levity into my work that my team plays into this and feels comfortable enough to join the fun. Holly Tawari, if you're in the room, you're responsible for this plaque. But this is a plaque that one of my teams made for me after spending an evening printing out journey maps for them before a big exec presentation. I got really good with the plotter. I think they appreciated that. At Netlify, humor was a core value for the product engineering and design orgs. I love that it was declared as an ingrained part of the culture. And the leadership teams would send out these weekly summaries out to the whole company, and each one would end with some observation or commentary. This one was written by one of my colleagues on the engineering team after seeing me without glasses for the first time. Apparently have a striking resemblance to John Legend, but an air of levity, an invitation to humor can go a long way in engaging with your teams and inviting them to be open with their needs and challenges. So yes, safety and trust as an overarching tenet that bleeds into everything that you do, the notion that nothing is sacred, leading with some curiosity, bringing levity into your work, a few dimensions to servant leadership, and finding Zen in that. And I'll close with the thought that the most unpredictable part about leadership is the best part. I had an amazing design leader ask me over dinner, Toledo, how do you think about your career? And it kind of took me off guard. I was like, can we order some pizza first? But my knee-jerk reaction was the people. And reflecting, I say that largely still holds true for me. Most of the team members I've worked with in the past have gone on to leadership positions at other organizations. My old colleagues, partners, and peers spread out across industries and disciplines. These relationships are the treasures that I hold near and dear over the things I've shipped at any company. Of the people you meet, the people you'll learn from. Some of them will be your boss. Some of them will be your peers. Some of them you'll hire. All of them will be your legacy. So serve them well, and I hope you find some Zen along the way. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Cool. We can open it up to questions, and I'm thinking we can use the raise hand feature under reactions if you have any questions. So if you have any question, please raise your hand, and I'll go down the list and ask you to ask your questions.
Cool.
Let's see. Okay. Oh, nice. I've Zoom queues it up.
Oh, that's where is that something I can see, or is that something that you?
Yeah, you can see it, but it looks like Michael has raised his hand first. So, Michael.
Thank you again, Eric, for coming out. I think that as a person who's admitted that they are unsure of public speaking, I don't know quite as the word or whatever, to be a repeat speaker at AMUX, we really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem.
But there are so many things that you talked about that I could yes but I've got one that's sort of top of mind for me at least. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between people management and design leadership. If there are any things that you would call out that you covered in the talk that should be front of mind, thinking about one over the other. I guess I'm focused more on the design leadership part rather than the people management, but I would love to get your take on that as somebody who's worked on both.
Yeah, that's a great call out, Michael. Now, they're very different. I think both roles. You don't have to be a manager to be a leader, for sure. I think the opportunity that senior contributors like yourself have is that you can do a lot of leading by example, right? You can get your hands dirty and pick up, pick up the pen, so to speak, right? When you're managing people, I would say, there's a lean toward creating the space for your contributors to do the work. I've been told, don't pick up the pen as a manager, right? But the things that you would signal to your team as a leader that can carry across both types of roles, whether you're managing people or not, right? And those things display in the way that you treat others. They display in the way that you're able to elevate others, right, as you progress in your career, right? And in that, it becomes less about like what you can do and more about what your team is capable of doing, right? So, and managing people carries a whole other craft and dimension to managing conflict and supporting the growth of individuals, you know, that is maybe a whole separate talk track, you know. I could certainly dive into those things, how we think about career progression and developing an experience for people to operate at certain levels. So that's a whole craft in itself too. But yeah, I say the things that you would consider as a high level contributor and leader are slightly different, but the weight of your actions are just as powerful. Yeah.
I'll hold on to that closing for sure. That's really good. That should be a slide on its own in your next time.
Cool. It looks like Bobby has also raised his hand.
I did. Good morning. Hey, Eric, I appreciate this talk. Man, this was a lot of affirmations. But my question is, what job or something that happened in your background that really led to your philosophy right now? For me, I used to wait tables. So making sure that the customers were right, making sure that the kitchen staff was good, the management was good, that would really led to me being the Bobby Lloyd I am right now. But what your background made you the Eric that you are right now, if you don't mind me asking?
That's awesome, Bobby. Yeah, I think everybody's experiences make them unique. You know, I grew up in the South as an Asian kid in Athens, a Catholic Asian kid. I'm a people pleaser by nature. My father was a college professor of 30 years tenure at UGA, and you know what I watched him do over the course of his career was create this extended family, right? His colleagues, his students, you know, they would come over to the house for dinner. We would have these huge dinner parties. And now, well past his retirement, you know, he's got these people that reach out to him and confide in him, consult with him. He travels the world, has places to stay. You know, he and my mom, like, they go all over the world. They stay with his old students, you know. And so I learned a lot about like how he, you know, how to treat people by watching my parents. I'll say a lot of what I learned in management was, you know, cutting my teeth at Mailchimp. You know, a lot of folks on this call got to experience a very early version of me navigating leadership and management. And I'm still learning today, right? But like Mailchimp was a very high growth environment. You know, we had a lot of tenured leaders there at the organization that had not worked at other large organizations. So there was a lot of growing for all of us involved, right? And that can be pretty painful when you're trying to scale at that pace and at that level. So yeah, I think my highest growth years were Mailchimp's highest growth years, and lots of stories there. But yeah, I hope that answers some questions. But thank you for that, Bobby.
No, it did. Thank you a lot.
Yeah, great question, Bobby. All right, next we have Paige.
Hey, Paige.
Hey, I'm also from Athens, so that's fun.
Nice.
Yeah. You know, you said this thing about levity, and I think it's very true. And I was wondering if you had any tips or tools for like how to remain in that state, because you have a good day and you're like, everything's going well, the sun's shining, I'm a Disney princess, and then you have another day where you're like, I'm feeling so negative about the future, or like, what if I can't do it, or like you're feeling super negative. Like, how do you get yourself like into your like Disney princess mode?
I have a daughter, so I can relate to that. But I mean, yeah. I think we can take our jobs way too seriously. I think it was Ryan Rumsey that posted something on LinkedIn recently that was just like, how do those of you out there like separate yourself from your job, and it's not a new sort of concept. I think this was floating around a lot in the pandemic, that that you are not your job and your job is not you. I think that like takes some of the pressure away, right? So I think it's super important for you to have a balance, but outside of work, and there's a lot of very passionate people in here in the room today, and love their work. But if you're able to find things on the side that can sort of satisfy your creative urges, I know Josh and I like to work in the yard, right? I mean, so we talk about working in the yard. So, that's like a passion of mine. I love to dig in the dirt. We got a garden. I love taking things apart, like, carpentry. I write music. So like, everybody's got their own hobbies. I think it's super important, especially if you're a creative leader, to take out those urges somewhere else. That can be your happy princess place, and work is an ebb and flow. You might find the most satisfying days where you're just firing on all cylinders, and those days where you're just like, all right, well, I need to like put myself in a different place, and having that sort of separate space to explore and just be creative is super important. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Next we have April.
Alex, sorry.
Okay.
Hey, Eric, thanks for the talk this morning.
How's it going?
Good. I really appreciated the orbiting the giant hairball reference, something that resonated with me a lot. As someone who's in a more traditional engineering organization, and am just experiencing some new projects that are really getting entombed in that bureaucracy, right? And a lot of my focus of my leadership is trying to accelerate out into that orbit, right? Out of that bureaucracy. Do you have any experiences or any direction for being embedded in traditional high bureaucracy environment and trying to boost out of that all of that hairball?
Yeah, I say find your people, right? Find your people that are looking to put on that Astro suit and orbit. At Apple, like you just don't get into a more bureaucratic environment than Apple. And while things were on rails and the programs were pretty tight, I was able to find people that wanted to experiment, right? Some of that was my manager helping pointing me in the right direction, but like a lot of it was just, you meet people in the organization, and we had a new design language we were developing for the App Store, and Node system behind it. This is back in 2015, so design systems was still a cool hip thing that nobody did, right? So I found people that were coming from an acquisition, Beats Music. They came into the organization, and there were all these really cool hip people that wanted to do things in a modern way, right? That were not in alignment with how Apple did things, right? Especially iTunes. So so we just formed our own little group and found cycles to create and stand up iTunes first design system, and we called it Tidbits. And that was our orbit, right? That was our place to express ourselves and still be very committed to the mission of the organization, right? And it wasn't what our leadership was asking for. It was what we knew we needed to be successful, right? It was what we were passionate about. And we did it all outside of, on our own accord, right? So I think it's, yeah, you got to find your people, and you got to find partners that want to play with you out there, and if, and ultimately what would be nice is for you to show that to the organization, and then start to weave that into the hairball, right? So,
Sure.
And showing is more powerful than just telling, right? So
cool. I'll second what Bobby said earlier, and a lot of affirmations, a lot of validation this morning, which is
awesome.
probably a good thing on a Wednesday. So thanks.
Yeah, totally.
Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask Eric?
You know what? I do have one last question, if I'm able to answer.
Yeah.
All right. There's no right or wrong answer to this. All right.
Yay.
Yeah. All right. So what's more important to you? I think I know this answer, but I'm gonna ask anyway. Success or significance, and why?
Success or significance. Can you expand on significance?
If I do that, I might be giving you your answer. So,
maybe I'll infer, I'll infer impact and significance. I mean, I think if you're after anything significant or meaningful, that is tied to inherent motivator that you carry, a curiosity that you carry. It's worth pursuing. And ultimately, I think that's what drives a lot of people's successes. So I think they're very much so related. But I think it's always important to keep a picture of success in mind, especially when you're trying to pitch an idea, you're trying to develop a case to pursue a thing. The first thing leadership's going to ask you is, what does success look like? So ideally, there's a convergence of what success looks like and what you consider to be meaningful and significant in your life. And you can find the overlap in the two and just live there.
Hey, I love that answer. I've been asking that question for the last 15 years, and I've gotten all types of questions, but I really appreciate that one. Thank you a lot.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Uh-oh.
I was curious, when I'm sure at every point someone's asked, like, do you want to continue being an IC, or do you want to, go into managing people? I know I was asked that question a long time ago, and I was like, I have actually no idea if I want to ever go down like managing people. So I was curious, like, what were indicators for you that led you to, explore the path of managing people?
Yeah. Well, I fell into management, right? So like I saw a need, and I saw that there was a team that needed some help with some processes, and I had seen pretty solid processes coming out of Apple, so stood the thing up, and then management was like, "Ooh, you're a manager." So I kind of explored that, but I'd always been curious about what it was like to manage teams, so that seemed to be a fit. And after a while, when you're in a high growth environment, there's a lot of fatigue, right? Especially when you don't have the right support, which is really the impetus and catalyst behind the talk today. I think finding other people in your network is super important to talk about these things, But if you are remotely curious about management, I think it's, worth exploring. And and I'll say that because it's not a dead end, right? You don't go down management and then you go, oh, I'm stuck here, right? I mean, I'm a testament to that. I was curious about what it was like to get my hands dirty again. So that's why I'm at, I found my way to Salesforce as a principal designer. And now I have the opportunity to step into management again with our leader, for the rest of the room that doesn't know, is out on paternity leave with two beautiful twin girls who's got his hands full. Yeah, we had a long thread about this in one of the Mailchimp alumni channels, and I think it's something that people struggle with, especially as they get further along in their tenure. What happens to designers in their 40s and 50s? You keep doing it, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think we're brought up to with this notion that we should start out in our careers and climb this ladder up to VPs, C-suites, and life isn't like that. Life isn't a straight line. It's a curvy path, and I think it's okay, right? If you got curiosity about it, you should explore it. I will say that after 5-6 months as an IC, loving every bit of it, but I do miss the management piece. I do miss these conversations, right? So yeah, I'm embarking on a bit of a shift, as you know, and I'm gonna enjoy it.
Nice. Well, thanks for answering that question.
Yeah, sure.
Does anyone else have any final thoughts, questions they would like to share with this group? Cool.
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me today, Vijeta, Michael, Cliff. So good to see all these familiar faces up here. Thanks for listening to my ramblings. Most of you know where to find me, so if you want to grab some coffee, let me know.
Absolutely. Cool. Just asking again if no one has any other questions or feedback. I see Jasmine turned on her radio. Hi, Jasmine. Cool. If you want to continue this conversation, you can certainly do so. We have a new Slack workspace. It is amux.org/Slack. We'll be posting it on the meetup post as well, so don't worry about it if you missed it. If you're also interested in AMUX's past presentations, you can check them out on our website. That's amux.org. But other than that, thank you so much for dedicating your morning to us and being part of this group so that we can have such a healthy and active conversation. So please stay tuned. We'll be back again next month. Yeah, thanks everyone. And thank you, Eric.
Thank you. You guys have a good Wednesday.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks all. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Eric. Thanks, everybody.